France's health minister announces the first coronavirus death in Europe. An 80-year-old Chinese tourist who was initially turned away from 2 French hospitals when he first fell ill. At the Munich Security Conference, French President Emmanuel Macron says Europe needs to develop more strategic dialogue with Russia, saying the old continent's influence is declining. And who to represent France's ruling République En Marche party in the race for the all-powerful mayorship of Paris? That's the question as its members rush to replace their scandal hit candidate. Hello, thank you for joining us in the France 24 newsroom. I'm Nadia Sharbi. For the first time since the outbreak of China's new coronavirus, a fatality has been confirmed here in Europe. French officials say an 80-year-old Chinese tourist died from the effects of the illness while in intensive care at Paris's Bichat Hospital, one of the country's few with special isolation rooms. And according to health authorities, the patient had previously been turned away from 2 other hospitals when he first fell ill in late January. Brian Quinn has been following events for us in Paris. Here's his update.
He was among the first to be hospitalized in France for treatment of coronavirus. Arriving in the country in mid-January, the 80-year-old Chinese tourist was admitted to the hospital on the 25th, kept in isolation, then in intensive care for 3 weeks as his condition continued to deteriorate. After several days in critical condition, he died Friday at this hospital in northern Paris. He had come to France from the province of Hubei in China, the epicenter of the current viral outbreak. His 50-year-old daughter traveling with him was also infected with the virus, but is no longer in danger and is expected to leave the hospital shortly. The man's death marks the first in France and Europe as a whole from the new virus, known medically as COVID-19. He's the 4th person to die outside of mainland China, where the disease has claimed over 1,500 lives amid some 67,000 cases of infection. As she announced his death Saturday, France's Minister of Health said she'll be seeking to strengthen preventive measures.
We need
to prepare our health system to confront a potential pandemic spread of the virus that affects our national territory. I will be meeting with representatives of hospital and city health professionals this coming Tuesday.
11 people in total have contracted COVID-19 here in France. 4 have recovered. 6 more remain hospitalized, but they too are expected to make full recoveries.
Well, the first coronavirus case on the African continent has also been confirmed in Egypt. The affected person is a foreign national who's been put into isolation in hospital. Speaking to France 24 a little earlier, the World Health Organization's Africa director explained efforts to prepare the continent in the wake of this new development.
We had already started working with African countries, with all our member states, to sharpen their preparedness during this period when there has not yet been a case. We have sent guidelines to all the countries telling them what they need to do in order to be better able to detect cases at the points of entry, for example. And we're working with them to improve their laboratory capacity to diagnose cases, etc. I mean, the fact that there is now a case on the African continent, I think, just underlines the importance of continuing to invest in this preparedness.
Well, meanwhile, in China, the latest figures show close to 66,500 cases and at least 1,523 deaths, most of them in central Hubei province. Patient 0 has yet to be found, but some experts suspect that wildlife and food markets may have been the original source of the virus, and that it was in that environment that it was passed on from animals to humans. Now, it's not the first time that markets selling exotic species of animals have been linked to such an outbreak, as Erin Ogunki reports.
It's more or less business as usual at the Tomohon Extreme Meat Market in Indonesia, where tourists and locals alike come to purchase bats, rats, and snakes for consumption. And this despite a government request to remove them over fears of zoonotic diseases, those that are transmitted from animals to humans.
The people here will never be afraid to eat bat and snake meat, because they have been our traditional food for years.
But despite cultural tastes and traditions, scientists are increasingly voicing concerns over the link between so-called wet markets, where animals are freshly slaughtered on site, and deadly viruses. The current coronavirus outbreak has been linked to one such market in Wuhan. Though researchers have not yet determined precisely how the illness first infected people, evidence suggests it may have originated in bats before spreading to an intermediary host animal, which subsequently transmitted the disease to humans.
But it's not really the eating of wildlife, it's the hunting, the capture, and killing them and cutting them up and getting exposed to the blood and the feces and urine. That's where these viruses get across. It's a lot more high risk to do that than eat livestock, which have less diseases, for sure.
According to the World Health Organization, more than 70% of emerging infections in humans are suspected to have come from animals. Such revelations have led to growing demands that the Chinese government prohibit wet markets, which were also traced to the SARS epidemic in 2002. Though Beijing temporarily cracked down on the sale of exotic animals after both coronavirus outbreaks, campaigners are now calling for a permanent ban. But outbreaks of zoonotic diseases go beyond exotic food markets. Experts also say the increasing proximity between humans and wild animals, due to climate change and the destruction of natural habitats for development, is also to blame.
In other world news, speaking at the Munich Security Conference this Saturday, Emmanuel Macron had some sobering words for his fellow European leaders. The French president warned that the old continent's influence was waning fast and that a reset of relations with countries such as Russia would be necessary in the long term. Here's a clip of his comments.
There is indeed a weakening of the West. 15 years ago, we thought that our values were universal, that we would have a lasting dominance over the world, that we were dominant technologically, militarily. And when I look at us now on a 10 to 15-year time frame, we're going to be more and more shaken by other ideas and other values.
Well, a little earlier, we spoke to Simon Young from our partner channel Deutsche Welle in Munich. Here's what he told us.
The potential decline of the West and the loss of influence is something that a lot of people have been talking about here. It's the overarching theme of this conference this year, I would say. Last night we heard from the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who was issuing a plea for multilateralism and essentially saying that the West needed to do more, that he said that we're moving further and further away from peace every year. This morning we heard from Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, who pushed back massively against that idea. He said reports of the death of the West are massively exaggerated. The US is very much involved in NATO, but in also all other sorts of international cooperation, such as the anti-ISIS coalition. And he said it's absurd to suggest that the US doesn't believe in the international community. He said the West is winning. Then we heard from the French President Emmanuel Macron, again pushing back in the other direction, saying, well, the West has got its problems, it faces real challenges, and in particular he focused in on Europe. He said more political convergence in Europe is part of the answer. He's worried about Russia. He says Russia will continue to destabilize. That's a fact. We can't change it. We have to respond to it. He said also responses in the Middle East and the other big neighbor, Africa, as he put it. So his view is that there are a lot of urgent problems that ought to bring the West together, and indeed, if only the West means Europe in particular, with or without the United States support.
Meanwhile, Facebook chief Mark Zuckerberg has just been addressing the room. What were the highlights there, Simon?
Yeah, he was being asked, I think, a lot about, for instance, election interference. He was willing to acknowledge the huge challenges there. He says that Facebook has faced a massive surge in the threats relating to election disinformation and manipulation through its systems. It says it's getting better, but Facebook needs to be vigilant. He said hate speech is another huge problem he was asked about, and also regulation. He said, well, a third way of regulation is probably what's needed for businesses like Facebook. We're not quite a telecoms company, but we're also not a website or a media company, really. We're somewhere in between, connecting people. And he said, we want to do what we can to reduce harms and harmful outcomes across the world and make the world a better place, is what he says. A little bit of an advertising pitch for the CEO of Facebook there.
Reigniting hopes for an end to the 18-year conflict, Washington and the Taliban have agreed to a temporary ceasefire deal. If the commitments are upheld, a peace agreement between the US and the fundamentalist religious group could be signed within 10 days. Ending the US's longest war has become a cornerstone of Trump's re-election bid.
After nearly 2 decades of war, a potential breakthrough in talks between the United States and the Taliban. The two sides have agreed to a partial 7-day ceasefire in Afghanistan, which many hope could eventually lead to an end to the 18-year-long conflict. U.S. officials, however, say the start of formal negotiations is conditional upon the Taliban reducing its violent attacks.
With regard to Afghanistan, the United States is fully committed to ensuring that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for terrorists to launch attacks against our homelands, and we are committed to maintain that mission at whatever resource level we need.
Under the agreement, the U.S. would continue to scale back its nearly 13,000 troops in Afghanistan. The Taliban, in exchange, has reportedly agreed to end roadside and suicide bombings, as well as rocket attacks throughout the entire country. Should the deal be upheld, the militant group would enter peace talks with Afghan officials, before which some 5,000 Taliban prisoners would be released. NATO has also said it would reduce its 16,000 forces in Afghanistan if the Taliban shows, quote, real will to reduce violence.
The best way NATO can support the peace efforts is to continue to support the Afghan army and security forces. So Taliban understands that they will never win on the battlefield. They have to sit down and negotiate.
The temporary agreement comes after more than a year of negotiations between the United States and the Taliban. Last September, President Donald Trump called off scheduled peace talks after the militant group claimed responsibility for an attack that killed 12 people, including one American soldier.
The Saudi-led military coalition has confirmed that a Saudi fighter jet has crashed in Yemen. This after the Houthi rebels said they'd downed the plane. According to a statement carried by the official Saudi press agency, the Tornado aircraft came down on Friday in northern Al Jawaf province during an operation to support Yemeni government forces. Now coming back to France, a day after the ruling République En Marche candidate for the Paris mayorship threw in the towel over a leaked sex video, his party is having to deal with the fallout. Benjamin Griveau's surprise withdrawal comes just weeks ahead of the high-stakes municipal polls, and the campaign trail has become that much more complicated as a result.
Non.
Out on the campaign trail, the welcome is a little frostier for these La République En Marche supporters. Disgraced former mayoral candidate Benjamin Griveau's name is still on the leaflets they're distributing.
I'm not saying it's in support of Benjamin Griveau, obviously. That's not the most obvious thing about it either. It's for Catherine Blé.
If he had won the election, then the mayor of Paris could have been blackmailed.
The La République En Marche candidate for the 15th arrondissement, Catherine Blé, says she wants to turn the page.
There's a before and after, but in the campaign many things happen. We still feel the same.
But many party supporters are feeling disheartened.
We are sad because we supported the candidacy of Benjamin Griveau. Also, it's ended in unacceptable circumstances, violent circumstances.
Despite the scandal, with the first round of the municipal elections in only 4 weeks, there's no time to lose campaigning.
And with that, we leave this edition, but for more, you can, of course, visit our website. That's france24.com. You'll find more on the stories we've been developing here, including the latest from the Munich Security Conference, as well as the first coronavirus fatality here in Europe recorded in Paris, an 80-year-old Chinese tourist who died overnight. We'll have more on that, as well as sports, business and culture news on our website, so do take a look. That's it for now. Stay tuned to France 24.